Our first session will commence now, and we've got to keep to the clock. So the moderator will be Valerie Metcalfe, and Valerie has been on our board since 2010. She is the MD of FCM since 2006, and her work in ECTAA and all around Europe, volunteer work, has been fantastic. Can I call Valerie to take the podium, please? Valerie, thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I'm glad Pat introduced me because I was afraid I was going to have to follow Philippe's lead and give my age. So, and one of the problems with that is I need reading glasses now for my notes, even though I wrote the points large. So today we have a very good agenda in the conference and some very interesting and key topics for our industry, which are coming down the line very soon. And it's my pleasure, I should say pleasure, to speak about NDC and New Gen ISS. And I'm no expert on them. Both tend to be veritable minefields. So I'm very glad to be able to welcome two panelists. And if I could introduce them and ask them to take their seats. We have Svend Leirvaag from Amadeus. Svend is in the industry since 1986, and he's worked across GDSs, airlines, hotels, and TMCs. His current role is Vice President of Industry Affairs with Amadeus, and in that role, he works with government institutions to ensure fair competition, to ensure sustainability for our industry going forward. And he has a very broad knowledge of our industry and what drives the technology in our industry. So, welcome. And if I could also call to take a seat Michel de Blust. And Michel is the Secretary General of ECTAA. He's been Secretary General since 1989. And over that period of time has seen and been through many changes in our industry, as most of us have. Since 1997, he sits in the agency program and PJC. He participates on a lot of global committees where through his role with ECTAA, he works very closely on lobbying the European Commission. And that's extremely important. And I think possibly that as members of the ITAA, we're not as aware as we should be of the important role that ECTAA play and the vast range of subjects that the ITAA actually work on with the likes of ECTAA in the interests of the industry. And this is going to take on extra importance with all of the new issues that we're facing over the next 12 to 24 months. ECTAA is the grouping of the national associations, travel agency and tour operating associations. And they are lobbying in legal matters such as the Package Travel Directive 2, which Anne is going to cover a session on later on, and also on competition and to make sure that we're not running into anti-competitive practices with some of the new processes which are coming down the line for us. So just let you know, basically, the running order for the session, I'm going to run through just about 5 slides, just by way of an introduction to the 2 topics that are going to be covered. And then I'm going to hand over to Svend and to Michel to speak very knowledgeably about them. We will have time for Q&A towards the end of the session. Some of you may be familiar to some extent with the topics, and indeed I was speaking to John Galligan this morning and we were reminiscing about, I think it was 3 years ago, John moderated a session on NDC at the ITAA Conference, and at that stage it seemed it was a good bit down the line, but it's close now and it's coming. It's already having an effect on our industry. So just very briefly on NDC, and I'm not going to read the whole slide, but NDC is a new distribution channel. It's a way through which the airlines are going to change the way they deliver content for us to sell as travel agents, and indeed directly to the general public. And the key things are that it's about how that content is communicated. It's a standard. NDC is not a GDS itself. It's an XML standard, which means that the airlines can deliver content in the same way to all the aggregators, GDSs, and anybody who can take and use a direct link. And what it's to transform the way the products are retailed. And of course, what's had big influence is low-cost carriers and auxiliary services, airlines finding a way to make extra revenue through selling priority boarding, bags, you know, only 2L. We're a very high-profile low-cost carrier market. The full-service airlines want to be able to make money out of the same kind of things, and distributing their content in this way gives them an option to do that. And they say it's to deal with current limitations, how they can differentiate their own products, how quickly they can get the content out there and give a transparent shopping experience. And in the early days, one of the key topics about NDC was personalized shopping. So if, when you're checking availability, you disclose your profile, am I traveling for leisure, am I traveling from business, what's my age group, and so on, that it could change the offer that you get. We can't talk about NDC without talking about one order. And one order is where the airlines are aiming to go to, that they will give a single booking file which will have one reference, not a ticket number anymore, but the booking reference will serve us as the reference for the entire content, and that could include hotel and car content as well, and a single payment for all of that. Basically, it's one booking file, one reference, one payment for the itinerary. That's still a bit further down the road, but not too far at this stage. The second topic, New Gen ISS. This is the IATA Industry Settlement System, New Generation Industry Settlement System. And the reason this has been introduced is to tighten up on risk associated with the sale of airline tickets and to avoid agents fraudulently coming in, doing a big spurt of sales and then disappearing and not selling for them. And also, so the airlines limit their risk to the general travel agent community in their cash sales. And, excuse me, the first BSP was introduced in 1971. So IATA say this system is actually antiquated now. It's over 40 years and it needs to be reviewed. Currently, there are 60,000 agents globally dealing with 400 airlines through the system. $240 billion in sales. And cash sales still at over 60%, which is quite high. So I think, just the final slide, there are four different really elements to New Gen ISS. The current agency accreditation models with which you're familiar with will still be there. However, there are going to be 3 levels. For an agent, and there are some advantages to this, agents have been struggling in some instances with having to get audited accounts for IATA because of the cost of that. There will be an initial lead-in level of payment with IATA which will not have any cash sale element of it, but which takes away then the need to submit accounts every year to IATA. Then there will be an intermediate level which is similar to what we have today, and then there will be a multinational accreditation level offering multinational agencies an option to declare a single head office point who will deal with accreditation for all countries involved in their services. Very few agents, I think, are going to be going down that road. Even a lot of the multinationals work with partners as opposed to wholly owned companies. So there's still going to be a big demand for the middle range, which is the accreditation that we have today. But Easy Pay is a new layer that's been introduced, and Easy Pay will be a prepay facility. Remittance, and I'm only speaking very briefly about these because Svend and Michel are going to talk around this. Remittance holding capacity is probably the issue that has caused the most concern in talks about New Gen ISS. And that is where, for all agencies, the credit facility will be capped. And I'll just come back to that in a second. Then the global default insurance. And I don't know if many of you are aware that in the last 2 months, global default insurance was rolled out in Ireland. And it's an alternative to having to get a bank guarantee. And IATA have an arrangement with 2 different insurance companies on a global level, whereby you can get a quote from them instead of having a bond for your IATA sales or your bank guarantee. So for the remittance holding capacity, for the credit cap, initially what was proposed was 5% growth in your business over your 3 busiest months last year would be the cap, which is absolutely crazy, even when you think about inflation. Then it went to 15%, and now thankfully, because of the lobbying of ECTAA and other global travel agency organisations, it's at 100%. And it's in pilot at the moment. So IATA are monitoring data in the Nordics, and they did that over the course of July, August, September, which I would point out are the quietest months for airline sales. But the way the formula works, they will take the average daily sales over your 3 busiest periods in the previous year. And then in any given selling period, you can exceed that by 100%. Now, in most cases, we would be more than happy to be able to double our sales over a business period last year. Wow, how likely are we to do that? But then when you really look at it, all you need is a big group, and you can do that within a selling period. So there have to be provisions for how you can deal with that. Now, I'm going to just go back to the NDC slide, just to have on the screen. Okay, and I'm going to ask Svend. No, Svend is with us till just before 11, and then he's going to dash off to catch a flight. I'm going to ask Svend and Michel to give their assessment of what NDC is to them, and we're going to deal first with NDC, and then Jean is going to give me a nod at about 10:30, so that I know we need to start moving over towards New Gen ISS. Please do take notes as people are talking, so that you can ask questions at the Q&A. So, gentlemen.
It was Pat's idea that we move here instead of sitting in the back. Is that okay? Is it better?
Far away.
You can come here also.
Is there another high stool? I feel left out. Go ahead.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Yep.
Thanks. Great to be here. I feel like one of those old blokes on the balcony of the Muppet Show.
Talk for yourself.
And some of the things that I sometimes say, I think, is reminiscent of their style. As you mentioned, I've been in this industry a long time. I've been on all sides of the table. I've been with the airline industry. I grew up in the airline industry. I've been with TMCs. I've launched an online travel agent. I've been with GDSs, and now I'm with Amadeus, and have the privilege of managing our so-called institutional relationships globally, our corporate social responsibility, and our sustainability initiatives. And I'd like to think that my experience allows me to have a balanced perspective on things and understand the different viewpoints as it relates to industry issues. Sometimes I think from an industry point of view, it's important to distinguish between what are arguably legitimate desires on the part of different stakeholders to change things, and what are perhaps not so legitimate, but ambitions that are sometimes not so evident, but nevertheless included in in the initiatives. And these two that have been mentioned, I think, are good examples, because there is nothing wrong with trying to standardize from a technical point of view, and we support that very much, because it should normally increase the efficiency of processes. But when there are elements added to an initiative that purports to standardize, that arguably is trying to shift the way that the industry works and the way that business is done, it becomes problematic. The same thing goes with New Gen ISS. There are elements to New Gen ISS which have been and still are outright problematic from a regulatory point of view, from a competition law perspective. And IATA is balancing very, very carefully on a knife's edge between legitimate initiatives on behalf of the industry and very, very problematic issues on the other side of that edge. Now, we were both involved in the early days of the so-called NDC initiative. And we raised some flags, both of us, with regard to what was really the objective of NDC, which technically speaking is nothing new. XML, we've had XML connections with low-cost carriers since 2006. And the technology as such is old, so there's nothing new and revolutionary about connecting between systems using XML. But the fear among a lot of stakeholders was that this was in fact a cloaked initiative to facilitate circumvention of the large distribution systems, facilitating large airlines' attempts to go direct to corporates, to travel agents. And although we managed, as a part of the industry coalition, to ensure that the resolutions of IATA, in fact, stayed on the right side of the knife's edge and remained as a standard-setting initiative, I think we're in the process where we see the true colors of the NDC initiative and the airlines that came together to devise it. We see what Lufthansa has been trying to do in the name of NDC. Does it have anything to do with the technicalities of XML? No. We have a complaint with our trade association and also ECTAA with regard to the legality of what Lufthansa is doing. And then more recently, we have BA, Iberia, in fact, attempting to do very much the same. Again, under the heading of new distribution capability and promises of improved content and improved functionality. Does it have anything to do with an XML standard? Arguably not. So this is sort of the environment that we're moving in, where we need to distinguish between standard setting, technology solutions, and processes on the one hand, and the commercial incentives and practices of players in this marketplace on the other. And I think the problem with this, with the NDC discussion, is that we can't see the trees for the forest, because it's hard to distinguish. So are we really distinguishing between the two, or are we in fact confusing the two? And I think if I can contribute to anything, it is to say these are two completely separate things. Standardization on the one hand is inherently, well, albeit conservative. There's not much innovation in standardization because it's always using proven technology, so it's not moving radically forward, but it is normally adding efficiency to an infrastructure. What airlines do, what travel agents do, what technology companies like ours do in the commercial side of things is a separate thing. So I just wanted to sort of put that premise in the beginning. What should I add?
Thank you, Svend. Well, first of all, good morning to everybody. Welcome to Portugal. I would have loved if our colleague from the Portuguese tourism organization would have had it, that the Centre of Portugal region, that is to say Coimbra Aveiro, is also our preferred destination and actor this year. And indeed, we had our General Assembly in Coimbra in May this year. So welcome to Portugal. Very happy to see you here. Back to this topic. And if you allow me, I will put, you may have two versions of my story, a neutral one or a spicy one. And I'm sure you're more interested in the spicy one. First of all, this NDC, as Svend rightly recalled, and Valerie, was established as a standard. But if you look at the International Standardization Organization's rules of procedures, and the rules of procedures of a CEN, which is the European standardization body, to establish the standard, you need to put all stakeholders around the table and make sure that there is an agreement on the scope of a standard and what is going to be put in this standard. And this didn't take place to start with. In 2012, IATA, behind closed doors in Abu Dhabi, got a resolution adopted. Resolution had an unfortunate number, 787. It was at that time where the Dreamline had all sorts of technical incidents, if you remember. And the resolution was not, didn't come to birth very easily, because there were concerns within the airlines industry, but there were a lot of concerns from our side. Resolution was adopted as a standard and was adopted without true consultation throughout the industry. And as soon as it was adopted, we raised a number of questions to IATA. Some of them are still unanswered. Because when we read the resolution, and when you read in the resolution, for instance, that through the NDC standard, an airline, in order to provide a fair quote to the agency, would like to know who is the passenger identity, what is the family composition, going down to the passenger's marital status, then you understand that behind NDC, which one of the biggest challenges for our industry, that is what everybody calls big data. NDC is, first of all, designed for airlines to capture our customers' data. No doubt about that. Second, it's true, and this is where I'm a little bit spicy, and forgive me for what I'm going to say. These people, the GDSs, for whom I have an immense friendship, almost, and a great respect, one can say perhaps that they've been sitting on their old Edifact technology for a little too long. But if you have a business which year on year produces nice profits, why would you change a successful business? And perhaps the airlines' request, the airlines' demands, aiming at modernizing the value chain processes between airlines, GDSs, and their distribution was probably legitimate. But when it came, these guys were already in the middle of a process of changing and adapting to the airlines' demand, adapting to this massive unbundling of airline product, which airlines started following a Ryanair or any other low-cost patterns. Namely, instead of selling an air ticket, which would include typical services which a normal traveler would expect when traveling, namely the ability to sit in an aircraft and not stand, the ability to sit jointly with a family, not having the wife at row 43. Well, if there is a nice girl next to the gentleman, that may be fine. And then the kids staggered all over the aircraft, as it's happening today with this pre-seating system where you have to pay. Basically today, a family, when flying with an airline, has to pay extra if they want to sit together. Well, this is what NDC is about. Well, when that was introduced, of course, behind NDC, yes, there is a need to move forward, introduce a new technology, introduce a new communication format. By the way, NDC is not a new communication format. But at the same time, there are much bigger challenges behind this. Capturing our customers' data, let's say, creating a tool which will allow airlines to go even further in the unbundling of airline services and basically making as much money or even more money through ancillaries as they are doing through the airfares. These were the issues we raised. Another issue which is coming up, as you know, there is yet another bloody EU regulation hanging over our heads next year. That's the new data protection regulation, GDPR. And GDPR basically is just introducing another layer of obligations in terms of data privacy. NDC doesn't conform with GDPR. And we have raised this with IATA, and we are still waiting for the answer. So that's another layer which we have raised with the EU. The EU, there is in the EU jargon, special committee of member states which looks at data protection issues, and we've been raising the NDC issue with the so-called Article 29 committee of the EU, which looks at all data privacy issues. And IATA was not happy at all with us raising, and we did it jointly, by the way. And we just a week ago raised it also when it comes to one order, because as we may discuss later, one order is also a number of issues. So these are my introductory comments, Valerie. We may have slightly divergent views, but I think that globally we all agree on NDC. And basically, if NDC would indeed stay as a standard and would not become also a tool to collect money through sectors booked through GDSs, either through an indirect connect platform, think of the 9.5 euros of our good friends of British Airways, or the 6.5 euros of Lufthansa, and some other airlines may come up, then we would be fine with NDC. But as we've seen over the last 4 years, NDCs means most of the time not very good news for the distribution, and probably a tool for airlines to increase direct sales, capture customer data, and distribute at the expense of indirect distribution. Thank you.
Okay, so
I'll have to
you
respond
have
to that.
Okay.
I'll have to respond
You want to
to
count
that. The allegation that we were slow and dragging our feet, I can't speak for our dear competitors. But as I mentioned, we have been working with XML interfaces since 2006, so that was 6 years before they started contemplating, or at least 5 years before they started contemplating NDC at IATA. Now, we have to remember that at the global context of standardization in the airline industry. Companies like Amadeus, we have, since deregulation, when the global distribution systems conceptually then were established because we rely on competition. We have been managing IATA's standards ever since. And because we had widespread, fierce competition in the airline industry, it was the association IATA that represented the needs of all of the airlines that put in place the standards. Now remember that IATA airlines are obliged to abide by IATA resolutions. So it's one decision applicable to all. So it's a big tanker to turn. If you change something fundamentally, you will have to make sure that all of your 253 airline members are in fact able to comply with those resolutions at some stage. Now the trouble comes from the evolution in the marketplace. We no longer have a marketplace where we have many equal and fiercely competing airlines. We have a global situations where we have 3 global alliances controlling 60-70% of global traffic. We have consolidation as evidenced in the report that we jointly published yesterday, day before yesterday, which you should read, by the way. And that means that the influence on the standard setting of IATA is held by a handful of airlines. Because the small ones are struggling. They don't have people to send to IATA meetings. They're busy trying to survive. So the ones that are in these working groups devising these new standards are the big guys, which means that the standard setting initiatives of IATA will be colored by the needs and perspectives of those large airlines. And this is the backdrop against which we need to see this. Now, we all know that you rely on fierce competition among providers of travel services. Your role is to make sense of that. Our role is to make that efficient for you so that you can make a living and you can provide your customers with the services, the choice, and the advice that they require. The less competition on the provider side undermines the foundation of the business we're in. So I just wanted to say that, and that's why when an IATA ship moves, it moves on behalf of 250 airlines, and we can work as much as we want with the Ryanairs of this world and EasyJet to connect with XML and new technology, but if the big guys don't want to and they want something else, we might have all the technology in the back room as we like, but they're not going to start using it. So I think that's, in fairness, I think it's important to mention.
Okay, so to the travel agent in the street, what exactly does this mean? So right now, if I book a British Airways flight on the GDS and my client wants to pre-assign a seat and pay €66 or whatever it might be for it, I'm going to have to go on the internet in order to do that. I can't do it in the GDS at a cost. There are certain auxiliary services that I can't add in. So if this makes it easier for our reservation people every day to book all the different elements of their product that the airlines are going to sell, that's good. But the overall concern is, what is the impact going to be? And we've already seen the impact, as you mentioned, Michel, of the Lufthansa sector fees. And from the 1st of November, British Airways introduced a €9.50 per fare component. And if you do a Dublin-Los Angeles round-trip through ticket, that's 2 fare components because it's out and back. So you're looking at €19 of a cost to book that in the GDS. So what can I do? I can take a direct XML feed through NDC from the airline, but what do I do with that? I have to have a tool to incorporate it into. So what we are still very dependent on is the GDSs to say, yes, you can do that, and we will incorporate it. But doubtless there are going to be costs associated with that. And I think what it's going to boil down to is what is going to be the least costly solution for the travel agent going forward.
Can I just comment? So again, now we're talking about the commercial strategy of an airline.
Yes.
And that one airline finds it opportune to discriminate some channels and favors some others, discriminate, penalize. That's a commercial strategy. We might like it, we might not. We might think it's illegal, or we might not. We might think it's a breach or it's abuse of dominance in some markets, and there have been initiatives taken to raise that question with the Commission and others. And it has nothing to do with technology. Again, distinguish between technology standards on the one hand and the commercial practices of players in the marketplace on the other. Now, you're right, because adding another pipe into your system at the travel agency level is not going to reduce cost. It's not going to make it simpler for you or more efficient for you to do the things you do. And our commitment to the industry is that from a technology point of view, we will do everything we can to ensure that we aggregate for you. We put the systems in place to allow you to continue working with the processes that you have in place and that you will develop that are the most efficient for you. Now, under normal circumstances, if all airlines were equal and all airlines were competing fiercely, we wouldn't have the issue with the BAs of this world, because that is driven by, and it's a natural thing. If I were on the airline side, I'd do exactly the same. So it's like the Chinese. The Chinese will do what the Chinese will do. Doesn't matter what you say, they will just do it. So this is a natural thing that stems from market power, and I do it because I can. But they can only do it in the market where they have market power. So the penalty is not going to fly in North America, because BA has no market power. The price in the market will be what the market will pay. If there's a fare, if there's an element in the fare that says a surcharge, it's not going to do anything with the fare. So the only marketplace where airlines that are trying this can in fact collect is where they're, relatively speaking, dominant. And again, distinguish between the standard setting, the technology on the one hand, and the commercial strategy on the other. The unfortunate thing is that these airlines are taking NDC hostage for their own commercial purposes. Now, interestingly, the BA Iberia NDC connection, they're not giving travel agents a content commitment through that either. So again, make sure that you address the commercial issues. What's it going to cost you? What content are you going to get? What are the things that you need to do to link to that? And stand up forcefully, like they have done in Spain, for instance, where they've been very, very clear on what is acceptable and what is not.
Okay, and I think I'm conscious that we need to move over to New Gen ISS, and on the upside, and I think I mentioned earlier, only 41 global airlines have actually gone down the road of working towards the NDC standard so far. And it's on 3 different levels. And I think they're almost all at level 1, which is visibility of content. Level 2 would be booking the content, and level 3 will be pulling those other services in under one order. And I hope I'm correct, and please, as I said, I'm not an expert, so correct me if I'm wrong. So to reassure people, this is not suddenly going to be a situation where all the airlines we deal with are adding surcharges and saying because we can now deliver NDC, because they can't yet. But the power players in our market, some of them can and are already doing that. Some of the power players are, rather than taking a penal approach to it, where they're saying, if you continue to book this in the GDS, I'm going to charge a supplement. Some of the airlines are offering carrots. I think American Airlines are saying, no, we're not ready to go down that road yet. And when we are, we're going to work with the trade to do it in a way that works for them. It remains to be seen. I'm going to deviate a little bit by saying, because conscious of the fact that we won't have Zen after 11 o'clock, we're going to do the Q&A at the end. But before we move on to New Gen ISS, Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question or say what their initial concern is about how this is going to impact on their day-to-day business? Does anybody have a question at this stage they'd like to ask?
So while you're thinking, from my point of view, the question is, should I as a travel agent be concerned if it's NDC XML or if it's some other XML or JSON or whatever the three-letter codes are? And from my point of view, no. Is it important to you if it's Edifact or if it's XML, if it works in your organization and that it's efficient with regard to the business you're in? No. We will make sure that it's workable for you. That's the promise of a technology company like Amadeus. Now, what you should be concerned with is, of course, how commercial practices impact on your business and the sustainability of your business. And from an association point of view, my recommendation is stop talking about NDC, stop talking about XML, stop talking about the technicalities, start talking about what value does it bring. What are the proposals from the players that purport to use this for something that is good for the world? What is it that they're bringing to you and to your customers? And start making requirements and demands of these players, and they possibly include ourselves, in how they help your business. That would be my clear recommendation, because I think we've spent too much time talking about three-letter codes and technology without really understanding what it is, and now we see the true color. So stop talking about that, start talking about values, start talking about how business practices affect you and what business practices you then need to adopt to evolve.
Michel, can I ask you your...
Can I again respectfully disagree a bit? Svend, there is, for indirect distribution, behind NDC, behind technology changes, there is a cost element.
Precisely.
I'll take you an example, typical example. When our good blue and yellow airlines friend, and I'm not talking about Ryanair here, came in with a 6.5 euro surcharge. What were the options for German, Belgian, but also Irish agents? Well, either continue booking through GDSs, because within the agency, the entire system, front, mid, back office, etc., was based on GDS technology, or move to a platform made available by Lufthansa, which, by the way, is a crap. And I'm saying is a crap because Pat told me through an email, use plain English language. So I'm taking the liberty to use Australian English. Lufthansa's platform doesn't work because it is 100 times slower than a GDS. There's no P&R ownership for the agency. So if you book through the Lufthansa platform, and then you need to go back into the booking because the customer has to make a change to the routing or whatever, you need to call the airlines. This is like when I started in this business 38 years ago. It doesn't work. It's not efficient. And in addition, it doesn't integrate currently in the mid and back office systems of the agency. So this is why, first of all, the changes bring a direct cost to the agency, the 6.5 euros. And we all know that the customers are extremely volatile. A 5 or 10 euro price difference can drive the customer from one agency website to an airline website or vice versa. Extremely volatile customers, extremely price-sensitive customers. So on top of these direct costs, there are indirect costs, because one day distributors will have to adapt their systems. Well, this is happening anyway, but this is now driven by suppliers. And changing the system doesn't mean that all airlines will move into that technology, because, as Svend rightly said, there are probably a dozen of large IATA members who are keen to move into a so-called NDC environment. But there are all the others. regional airlines, which are nevertheless very important, especially for European markets, which is mainly a point-to-point market, unlike the US market, for instance. So there are a number of costs attached to it, while the benefits, to be honest, to the distribution are still unclear.
But I put those, the costs are part of the commercial proposition. So when American Airlines now says, oh, I want you, dear travel agent, to use my special solution up the alley and special price for you, my friend, they recognize that it's costly. So they say, oh, I have to pay you an incentive, or I have to pay you a commission, you call it what you like. So everybody recognizes that it entails costs. So that's part of the commercial value proposition that contains what content is the airline providing you, what fares is the airline providing you, what incentives or what commissions or overrides is the airline providing you with to make it worth your while to incur those costs. It's a commercial thing. It has nothing to do with technology. Technology as such can be disruptive, but that's where the commercial elements have to come in to smooth the way in that case.
Okay, so I'm conscious that we need to move on to New Gen ISS. I was nearly going to pass out and fall off the stool because I was trying not to breathe. And let me go forward again to the slide which shows the 4 elements of New Gen ISS. I would expect that this is where most of the questions are going to come, because this is where agents can see it's going to impact them on a day-to-day basis. And for example, some of the questions around the Easy Pay, the idea of Easy Pay is that IATA will open an account in the name of the travel agency. IATA will own the account, and the travel agent will lodge money to cover sales, so it's prepaid sales. And as soon as you issue a ticket, the value of that ticket is then secured for IATA within the Easy Pay account. It raises questions such as, will the agent have access to see how their balance is doing? And how, when they realise they're running out of credit because they've had an escalation of sales, how can they get more funds into that account? And the minimum transfer time, I believe, is 3 days, which could be problematic. And if it's over a weekend, it could be up to 7 or 8 days. So there are areas of the alternative forms of payment that have to be addressed. Another option, and I'm sure you're familiar with Resolution 890, which means that officially you're not allowed to use a company credit card, the agent's own company credit card, to pay for their IATA airline sales. Now, that practice has been done, and IATA haven't enforced the resolution, so I know some agents are doing that. But part of the deal as such that made the whole idea of New Gen ISS and the credit cap viable was that IATA would change that resolution and allow agents to use a company credit card, which is much easier than having to have money in a prepay account. But now restrictions have been put on that. So what you would need to do is register with IATA the forms of payment that you intend to use to pay for your airline tickets. And if you want to use a company credit card, you have to have pre-agreement with each plated carrier that you deal with, which is an administrative nightmare. So ECTAA are lobbying and are putting a submission in the next couple of days to IATA to say what is acceptable to the travel industry community under New Gen ISS and how the credit cap and alternative forms of payment are going to be handled. Pilots have been running, and I think the stage where in our market, this is going to come in waves, I think in the stage in our market where we expect the credit cap to come in and go live is not till the end of 2018. Is that correct, Michel?
Yes.
Yes.
As far as Europe is concerned, it will be several waves,
yes.
But let's say roughly by the end of 2018, if it's adopted.
If it's adopted, okay. So, on that note, I'm going to hand over again to Svend, you might need to go first because you've only got another 10
Yeah.
minutes with us.
So I'll speak for 12 minutes and then run. New Gen ISS is a very typical example of an IATA initiative that at the outset seems to be founded on very, very sound reasoning and good and sound objectives of something we would want to change for the good of the industry. And that is to reduce fraud and bad debt from travel agency sales. It amounts to a staggering 0.02% of BSP turnover. So it's not really like the most critical thing, but of course it's a lot of money. And the initiative, again typically IATA, devised behind closed doors. The solutions were ready-made, and then the IATA representatives would come to you, to us and others, and say, can we please collaborate to implement our solution? And the trouble is that it's almost Orwellian, you know, that it's all of the nice stuff that these solutions will do. And when you look underneath the surface, you find all of those elements that sort of were just put in there that are very, very problematic and arguably also contentious from a legal point of view, as in the case with EasyPay. But everybody agrees that yes, we would like to get rid of fraud, and we'd like to reduce the amount of bad debt from travel agency sales. Not that it's a huge thing in Ireland, it's probably more in Nigeria, but yeah, we agree. And the question is how to do that. And everybody agrees that real-time monitoring of agency sales, instead of us reporting every 6 hours, if we report your sales dynamically real-time, IATA can monitor that, and if they see abnormal development in travel agency behavior, they can pick up the phone and say, what's going on? And if nobody answers, they could, which is the second part, switch off the agent's ability to sell using that form of payment. Legitimate? Yeah. If the limits are reasonable, so the remittance holding capacity or similar, if that threshold is reasonable, then we wouldn't have a problem with it. But then, if you look then at the small print, the idea was that if we cap the agent's ability to sell form of payment cash, and you're not allowed to sell using your own credit card, we will force you onto a prepaid solution that, by the way, is an IATA monopoly that we call EasyPay. And for that, we need the industry to develop a third rail, a new form of payment, not cash, not credit card, but a new form of payment to support an IATA monopoly in payments. And you all know the development of the payment industry and the payments market, how it's flourishing, how new solutions and players are in the marketplace as we speak. So that very initiative of the cloaked initiative, so I will reduce your ability to sell for cash, I will prohibit your ability to sell using your own credit card, and I will force you onto a prepaid solution that is monopoly mine, because I will save money for the airlines, so I will save the cost of money and credit in the cash sales. I will get you to pay for the cost of credit by putting money in a bank account, and then you pay me prepaid, and you pay me instantly. So the objective has been then to ensure that that they reduce the cost to the airline, and they push the cost to the travel agent. And they would impose a standard new form of payment to make us pay for achieving IATA's objective, contrary to your interest. And we've been pushing back, all of us, at the industry level, very, very hard against this. So if now the PACONF goes as we hope, EasyPay might be one of several options in the marketplace. There will not be a new third form of payment. It'll still use on form of payment credit card. And on that rail, you will also find all of the, the B2B wallets and all of these things that are in the marketplace, competing with IATA if they choose to enter in that marketplace, but on a non-discriminatory basis. And they rely on us for real-time monitoring, and we've said very clearly, we're not going to give you real-time monitoring until we agree on the premise for the whole package. So they have to formally then take out new form of payment. They have to formally agree to and standardize the prepaid secure cash payment methods, of which EasyPay might be one. They have to agree with the travel agency community on the remittance holding capacity. Then we will work with them to implement the mechanisms that we think will work to reduce fraud and bad debt. So this is hopefully now at a stage where we can tie up this bag and say we succeeded. It would be a major defeat by IATA, and again another example of how their approach is counterproductive, and we've spent so much time and energy on this, but hopefully we'll end up in a good place.
And Michel?
Yes, I agree with you, Svend, for a change. Because
Thank you.
Because I think that this is a very valid summary. When we saw this coming, it was clear that behind, remittance holding capacity is hypocrisy. It's actually sales capping. And when we saw, and the initial formula was not last year turnover plus 100%, the initial formula was last year turnover plus 15%. That is to say, every successful agent managing to increase turnover, managing to increase airline sales, would have been punished for being efficient and for having its turnover increasing. So we immediately raised the concerns of course, of airlines collectively capping the sales of their competitors in distribution. And we have engaged with the EU Competition Directorate. Despite of all that, we've managed to change the formula and move up to 100%. And according to IATA pilots, even with a growth margin of 100%, they made trials, and they found out that the trials were run during the period July to September this year. And they found out that 1.4%, 1.33%, that's almost 1.4% of all IATA accredited agents would have been caught by the remittance holding capacity. That is to say, all of a sudden on a Friday night, when an agency has to issue 600 tickets because the agency is operating a conference for a corporate customer, all of a sudden on a Friday night at 6 p.m., you found out that you can't issue any kit ticket. You get the conference organizer on your back, you get the airlines on your back, and you try to reach IATA. There's nobody left in the office in Madrid because it's Friday night. This is another practical consequence of remittance holding capacity. So we managed to raise it to 100%. But then what the condition we are now requiring in the submission which will we make at the Passenger Agency Conference, and this submission was agreed 2 days ago by the Air Matters, through our Air Matters Committee, where Valerie is representing ITAA. We have said to IATA, you have to change Resolution 890, where it says in paragraph 1.4 that an agent is not allowed to use the agency card. And we are saying to IATA, you have to reverse that resolution. Agents must be able to use the form of payment they want, especially if they reach remittance holding capacity, unless an airline disagree. And we are saying also that if an airline has concerns because of the increase of its merchant fees, well, that's up for the bilateral commercial agreement between the airline and the agency to decide who is going to pay for what. But as Svend rightly said, not only were they going to cap agency sales, but they were also going to force agents to use the most onerous and the most anti-competitive payment system, which have agreed with two providers. I forgot the name of the second one, but the first one is Edenred. I don't know whether you've heard of Edenred. They are not specialized in issuing cards, but in some countries in Europe, they issue what is called lunch checks or restaurant checks. I don't know if you have them in Ireland. In Belgium, they are very popular because this is an income, a nice benefit which companies can give to their staff, and it's not part of the income tax. The system presented to Edenred, as Valerie pointed out, is a system whereby, first of all, an agency has to put money up front. It has to do it at least 3 or 4 days in advance because the process looks like a 19th century process where you were transferring money through the Western Union, and the Western Union still had horses, you know. But then on top of that, the account with Edenred is not the agent's account. It's an account in the name of IATA. And the cherry on the cake is that in addition, they are putting a liability waiver. In other words, the agents would see, if this would be passed, in the resolution that despite agents prepaid, despite the fact that the account would not be in the name of the agents also agreed to a liability waiver vis-à-vis IATA for any errors and omissions. Come on. I mean, so we are opposing to that, and basically what we are saying to IATA is very clear. Listen, number one, forms of payments must be open, and it's up to the individual commercial decision of every agent and every airline on which form of payment they want to use. Number two, and this is absolutely conditional, if form of payments are not open, we take care of our remittance holding capacity, and the next day we talk with the competition directorate of the EU, and I suspect that a number of ECTAA members will do it with their own national competition authorities.
I thought you were going to be more spicy and said, we take that and we stuff it up their asses or something.
That's probably too plain language.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt there. Svend, you're going to miss your flight.
No, that's okay. Just one final thing.
His flight's at 12:15.
The trouble we have and the challenge we have is that we are letting ourselves be forced into a dialogue that is inherently aviation-centric, airline-centric. When the industry is much bigger than that, and from the consumer point of view, aviation might be big, but it's not the only part of my journey. So when we talk about issues like payment, we talk about how to handle traveler identity, we talk about traveler and data protection, traveler authentication. The context is much bigger, but IATA is trying to force us all onto their little airline-centric, a few large airline-centric pitch, and we need to pull them out to a much bigger forum among industry stakeholders so that we get all of the perspectives represented and we find solutions that work for everyone. So we're now taking the initiative and we're working with ECTAA and also the World Travel Agency Association Alliance to strengthen what we call the Distribution Industry Stakeholder Working Group, which we are building up as a peer-to-peer partner of IATA, so that they do divide and conquer if they can. So we're saying we, as an industry on the distribution side, we need to have a voice that is a representative of the whole industry not only aviation, and we will respond as an industry back to the aviation industry on a peer-to-peer basis. Now, of course, they find this very, very difficult to accept. But if we work together and we're consistent in what we do, and with the participation of your association as much as all of the others, we will succeed, and we will be able to influence on standards. We'll be able to agree on setting standards that would be much better than if we leave all of this to IATA. So your engagement is needed. Your awareness is needed, and you're lucky you have some good people in your association and also in ECTAA that can represent you and will do so very well. So with that, thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Svend. Okay, Svend, thank you very much. Svend Leirvaag. Okay, so we have another 12 minutes or so in the session. I know you're just all enjoying this so much. So I'm going to try and put a bit of a positive spin on this now, okay? Let me think really hard. Look, as I've said, the go live of the CAP is not going to hit our market until the end of next year, right? We're a very small community in Ireland, and we can all work together and help each other out with this. I think it's going to be absolutely vital that we start to hold fairly regular sessions through the ITAA for members on how things are progressing with this, and through ECTAA in the European Commission Forum as well. There are other options on the upside. You can have 4 ad hoc changes to your credit limit. So if you know you have, you're going to have a surge in ticketing for a group or whatever else it might be, you can agree with the particular airline in advance, so that even if it affects your credit limit for that month, it's going to be okay. We have some concerns about the process through which the airline will then communicate that back to IATA, so that when you actually go to issue the tickets, you can. And that all has to be thrashed out. The other option is virtual cards, because if you start to use virtual cards, there's no issue about using the corporate card, the general data protection regulation and so on, because it's a different card number every time. But what's sitting behind this, the corporate cards have higher merchant fees that the airlines are going to take a hit on, and that's obviously where the issue is. Now, the airlines are not saying they won't accept a client corporate card, but they're saying they won't, or they can choose not to accept an airline's corporate card. That raises anti-competitive issues, which ECTAA is also addressing. So all of these are under regular discussion now, and we will give you feedback as and when we get it. But I think it would be prudent at this time to see if anybody has any questions. Is everybody in shock?
Under what circumstances do you think an airline would refuse to take an agent's card? As in, if they're taking credit card payments on their own website?
Yeah. Well, because the rule is going forward that you have to pre-register your form of payment with IATA. So if you intend to use an agent corporate card as one of your alternative methods of payment, you have to register it. Now, there was an APJC meeting last week, which is the Airline Programme Joint Council in each country. In Ireland, it's 6 agents and 6 airlines. And we were discussing this at the APJC, and we asked the question, is the default that you can use the corporate card unless an airline says no? Or is the default that you cannot use the card unless the airline says yes? They actually weren't able to answer that, but I found out through the Airline Matters meeting, the default is you cannot use the card unless the airline says yes. And this is where the issue is, because as I said, you'd have to go to every plated carrier that you work with and say, can I make an agreement with you that you're going to allow me to use my agency American Express card or Visa card or whatever? And that's difficult to set up. So, but we hope this won't go ahead. Obviously, what we want is a blanket agreement that if an airline is prepared to take ABC Limited's card and cover the merchant charge on that, then they need to also accept the agent's card. Michel, I'll hand over to you to comment further.
Well, regarding the use of cards, basically airlines today are relying on a very old provision, which in Resolution 890 was saying agents are not allowed to use the agent's card for the purpose of remitting ticketing sales. In the old days, there were two good reasons for that. The first good reason was airlines wanted to keep their merchant fees to a certain extent under control and up to an acceptable level. The second reason is that probably those of my generation remember that 25 years ago when airlines started to bundle frequent flyer programs with credit cards, there might have been a very small number of agencies who thought that that was a nice way to accumulate miles and then go on holiday at the expenses of the airlines. But the core reason was the merchant fees. Now, merchant fees have gone down. B2C merchant fees, which is to say merchant fees when using a customer card, are now capped by an EU regulation, as you know, and are extremely low. B2B merchant fees are still open, are still higher, but are up for negotiation. And because of the increased number of payment system providers, competition is open there, and we see that B2B transactions merchant fees tend to decrease everywhere in Europe, in particular when the volumes, the transaction volumes justify it. So there is no justification to have this limitation. And this is why we are saying to the airlines, you want to cap agent sales. We can only agree if you offer agents a genuine, not a prepayment, but a genuine opportunity to reduce the cash sales if an agency would reach the top level of remittance holding capacity, use their card to reduce their cash exposure, and therefore avoid being in a situation where all of a sudden the ticketing functionality is suspended. And unless, and this will be up for negotiations, I'm afraid, in the next 4 weeks, unless IATA agree on wording whereby, for instance, all forms of payments would be open for agents unless an airline would disagree on a specific form of payment, then we would most probably oppose to remittance holding capacity. So we want to reverse the system basically, and we want to avoid that each and every agent has to go and knock at the door of every airline it is selling to say, can I use credit card A, B, C, D, or E? No, we want to say, in principle, all forms of payments available on a given market are allowed unless an airline doesn't agree to it. This is what we want. Valerie, I have a couple of other questions. Can we go back to the slides of... because yes, this one. There are two other remittance holding capacity and formal payments are the two major aspects in the change proposed by IATA under new Gen ISS. But there are two other aspects where I'm still looking and trying to find travel agents among the European travel agency community who see an interest in. First of all, global default insurance. IATA is offering a product which is put on the market by a German insurance company called Euler Hermes, and which is marketed through a broker called Eoghan in March. It's out everywhere in Europe. It's out in Ireland. Have you seen something? Have you been asking for a quote from Euler Hermes? Have you heard of anything? Right, it's interesting because we are curious to see whether that will be, let's say, an attractive commercial offer. And the reason why we are keep monitoring this is that we wouldn't like IATA gradually, because in the set of resolutions, IATA has also the ability to accept or decline insurance providers or bonding providers. And we would not like IATA gradually to basically favor the insurance provider they have an agreement with to the detriment of all the other insurance providers which are already on the market. And I know a number of our colleagues, the ITAA equivalents in the rest of Europe, who have very good commercial agreements to the benefit of their members with one or the other insurance provider. So we are keeping an eye on that. I think that if one day you are approached by Eoghan in March, or if you receive an offer from IATA, it might be interesting to look into it and to make a premium comparison. And the last thing, which is interesting, IATA wants to propose now 3 types of accreditations, beside the standard accreditations which we all have today. They want also to propose a so-called no cash or light accreditation. That is to say, an agency gets its accreditation but doesn't have any cash facility. That means no bonding, no financial criteria, etc. But that implies pre-financing sales. Is it a realistic business model? That's a question to you. And the third level of agency accreditation model is what IATA called the multi-country accreditation. Multi-country means it's an agency which would have branches or subsidiaries across Europe or across the world, could basically operate its IATA accreditation through one central accreditation rather than many accreditations. Mind you, remittances to BSPs would still take place market by market. It would be centralized. But on these two, have you heard of it? Does it sound attractive business-wise? That is something which I would be happy to hear.
Okay. I'm conscious that we're on time. So all these aspects of New Gen ISS, we're going to have to, as I said, get into more detail of them as in the coming months. And I think, and I'm going to answer Michel's question there, I think that one of the big problems with IATA is how they communicate things. I do recall seeing a letter that came in about global default insurance. But the problem is that everybody gets so much information in every day that you speed read things. And it's very easy to, it's too easy to miss something important in the flood of information that comes in. And a lot of the IATA information comes in on BSP link. And we were discussing this earlier. In a lot of instances, the people who access BSP link are accountancy department. And this kind of thing tends to go over their heads. And I think there's going to have to be better communication about these key changes like this that are coming into the industry that people are not becoming aware of when they should be. We can certainly help by communicating it through the ITAA to members. But I think definitely everybody needs to be more careful of reading all the information that is coming in on your BSP link going forward while all this is happening. So I'm going to close because we have the coffee break, and just to say Michel will still be with us. Michel is going to participate in the next panel as well. So if anybody wants to address any questions or ask me, I'm not an expert on it. If I don't have the answer, I'll add it to our list of questions that we need to address.
Just before you close, Valerie, can I just make a couple of points? I know Amadeus were... Oh, thanks, Lorraine. I know Amadeus were very well represented here today, so I just want to make a point because I know that there's a lot of Travelport customers here. Just on the NDC thing, Travelport is NDC certified, We're ready to consume the new content from the airlines as soon as they're able to give it to us and distribute it to our customers. On the payments side of things, we're running a few WebExes because we know this is a huge area of confusion for our customers. We're running some WebExes next week to, obviously I'm not going to do them, it'll be our accounts department in the UK, where we'll take the changes that are coming down the line and we'll explain them to you and how we can work with you to make them better. So I just wanted to make those 2 points.
Okay, thanks, Tara. Tara's with Travelport,
Yeah.
and I know, and certainly in the early days as well of NDC, Travelport have also been very active in their preparation for the NDC standard. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to ask just in literally 1 minute summary to ask Michel, what should we be doing now to prepare for, if you can tell us in 1 minute, what we should be doing to prepare for NDC and NewGen, and is it pretty much awareness at this stage?
I mean, NewGen, a number of decisions are going to be adopted or not to be adopted by IATA's Passenger Agency Conference, which is the body which is adopting changes to the Passenger Agency Program resolutions. That is taking place on the 20th and 21st of November. We are not allowed to attend the conference. The conference decides behind closed doors, but there will be an open session at which ECTAA will make a presentation and voice its concerns, I mean the concerns of the industry. Compared with 20 years ago, I don't want to close the session with negative notes. Something is changing within IATA. 20 years ago, basically, if we had to post to any of a proposed change by IATA, we would have simply slammed the door at our faces and say, well, this is not your business, this is the way it is. At that time, we were still getting 9% basic commission plus overriders, right? Having an IATA accreditation was a slightly different song. Things have changed within IATA. They have realized that, unfortunately, they can't just walk away with what they want to do and impose it straight away into the industry. They have to listen to the industry to a certain extent. So this is why I very much hope that we will manage to get, at the end of the day, a reasonably balanced agreement. But having said that, remittance holding capacity is coming. We very much hope that we will get the necessary flexibility on forms of payment. We didn't speak about something else which is not part of remittance holding capacity, is we are going to increase the agency fees. This is coming up. We have asked IATA an economic justification of a change. We're still waiting for it. The economic justification is that we just need to pay for all this crap, basically. Sorry to use plain language again. But what agents need to do, of course, through ITAA, we will make sure that you are well aware of the changes which are coming up. We are, through Valerie, through Pat, etc., we are making sure that you will be aware of all the changes. The changes will take place in 2018 and 2019. We will make sure that this is a smooth transition. So people will have time to adapt, and will have time, especially in the cases where an agency has huge seasonal variation in its turnover. We will make sure that you get the chance to adjust and be prepared for this. Apart from that, on NDC seems to be very much favored by a number of large airlines. The Lufthansa Group, the AIG Group, especially Iberia and NBA. We would expect Air France KLM to come up with something probably next year. But that depends also very much on when do their agreements with our colleagues, the GDSs, expire. If Lufthansa was able to introduce its distribution charge in 2015, it's because the Lufthansa commercial agreement with GDS on booking fees was coming to an end. Some of these agreements are still running over in 2017, so we will have to monitor what's going to happen in 2018. I would not be surprised that Air France KLM may one day adopt a similar scheme as the Lufthansa one or as the British Airways one. Now, concerning the Lufthansa DCC, there was a lot of commotion on the Lufthansa-dominated markets, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Belgium. Now the tension is gone. The tension is gone because, first of all, probably 80% of the distribution doesn't pay the DCC anymore. They found commercial agreements with airlines. The large TMCs, the large OTAs, the large consortia found agreements with the Lufthansa, or even corporate customers said. Siemens said to IATA, we're not going to pay your bloody surcharge. I don't know how you say bloody surcharge in German, but so roughly, unfortunately, I fear that those who still have to pay the surcharge are the smaller independent retailers, because unfortunately they do not always have the necessary commercial bargaining power to find an agreement. It will be interesting to see what happens with the BA Iberia surcharge, because I think this is most important for your market. BA is definitely probably a lot more important on the Irish market than the Lufthansa Group. We are not excluding as ECTAA to file a complaint similar to the one we filed against Lufthansa, because the Lufthansa surcharge is a violation of a EU regulation on the Code of Conduct on Computer Reservation Systems. We need for that to check what will be the functionalities and what will be the actual flight offers on the BA Iberia Direct Connect platform. If that Direct Connect platform is comparable to a GDS, then fall under the obligations of the code, and then we can possibly envisage to file a complaint.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Michel.
Thank you very much, Michel. Yeah, okay, can everybody hear me? I just want to say, as we wrap up this session, to thank Val for her moderation, and again to thank Anne. Both of them represent the ITAA very ably at the ECTAA events and the ECTAA meetings. And I hope after this session that you've managed to get an understanding of why we are members of ECTAA and the value that we derive from this. So again, Michel, I'd like to thank you very much for making your presentation very plain, for disturbing us to an extent that we didn't really want to be disturbed this morning. But you know something? Disturbance and disruption can be very positive in terms of bringing your business forward. So thank you very much, Michel. I'd like to give you this small token of our appreciation for you.